Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/slash Tales from Tech Support. In today's episode, locking out the CEO, COO, CFO, and CIO. That time I was tasked with pre-forming a hostile takeover of a company I didn't work for. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Locking out the CEO, COO, CFO, and CIO. That time I was tasked with pre-forming a hostile takeover of a company I didn't work for. Rogue answers I was just instructed to disable the CEO's account post reminded me about something that happened to me a long time ago. Several said they would like to hear it, several others have asked me to repost it over here, so here y'all go. This is their fault. Me, I'm the sole person in the IT department for a medium-sized business that should likely have at least 3 and an actual budget. It's also in an entirely unrelated sector of business to the other company this story is about. To preface this, I did not run this by corporate legal first. While I am mostly familiar with the rituals to make contact with Dimension which council resides, at this time of the year it's hard to find the specific breed of goat required. So everything here is my personal opinion and impressions of what happened. As far as I know, the statute of limitations expired a while ago on those that were suspected of wrongdoing, and all the legal cases on the matter were settled many years ago. Back in the space year of 2011 TX, I get pulled last minute into a meeting at 4 p.m. on a Thursday. My employer, who I will refer to as Bossman, is planning to fire the entire C-level of another company he owns. Let's call them dumbass A through D. Bossman suspected that A, CEO, and B, COO, are embezzling, intentionally mismanaging, and were planning to start up their own company that would compete and take the clients and vendors with them. Turns out, it was all of that and more. I did not work for that company, but I had some involvement in the beginning when it was initially started over a year earlier. Purchased some equipment and did a little bit of basic system setup, NAS, exe host, some VMs, a few PCs, a couple laptops, but it had run on its own without me since then. So at this meeting, it's Bossman, myself, legal counsel in their corporeal form, the accountants, and a couple others who were forgettable. Bossman tells me that in 20 minutes when that company closes for the night at 5 p.m., I'll be going over there to do the following. Copy all company data we can find, both physical and digital. Locate any possible sources of evidence and secure them. Identify all internal and external accounts and passwords and services used, including everything financial. Expand the CCTV to the front door and lobby and secure the DVR from tampering. Set up kill switches to cut all outside access to cover anything we might have missed. Spoiler, we did. Leave no traces that we were there. That all went pretty well, surprisingly. We breached the building and disabled the security system. I got a couple guys from my day job to take care for installing the extra cameras. A couple others took care of making copies of all the physicals. Dumbass CIO/IT manager failed to disable my admin account on the NAS or ESG server, so just triggered a backup onto a new disk I took that back with me. I pull copies of any data I could find on the workstations using the admin shares and the unchanged local admin password I set up a year ago when I built the computers. Luckily on the computers they added since I was involved, they duplicated everything, including the weak local admin password I had told them to change. For everything else, they almost had good password policy. Nearly every internal and external account and system had unique cat seizure for a password that was at least 16 characters long. The internal ones I bypassed easily with local ADMIN. The problem, for them, was they wrote every password down on random notes all over their desks. The problem for me, however, was they did not note what each password was for nor the account names. Fortunately, that didn't end being that difficult to figure out as each one was contextually near things and other notes it was related to. Except for the Rolodex of passwords, that ended up being a long list of random passwords. There was a shared KDBX as well, but the master password was in several locations. I could not get hands onto the laptops themselves as those were taken home, but I pulled a copy of a backups of them from that afternoon. Regular backups was something I told them they should do, and for once they had listened. I installed a second DVR and hid it in the rafters. The new cameras recorded to it and the old cameras mirrored over. Friday comes. Nothing was suspected. Seriously, not even the half dozen new camera mounted in the ceiling. We didn't even do a good job on mounting them. The guys I had do it never done anything like that before, but it was adequate enough to work. Friday night they lock up and leave. We've been watching remotely and move in. Locksmith is brought in to change all the locks. I trigger the kill switches, break incoming email to gaps and redirect to a new server. All external accounts we were able to find get their passwords re-scrambled. Almost everything goes to plan. Monday morning, B try to access the building, can't. A shows up shortly after, he can't either. We're watching remotely. I'm wishing I had brought popcorn. Both are then informed via phone by the lawyers that they and C and D, CFO/accountant, are fired. All of the other employees, none of which show up Monday, are individually informed they are not fired and can to come in tomorrow, or if they wish, resign. We give them a pass on skipping Monday. I can't go into much detail, but the additional cameras were a good idea, as was hiring private armed security for the next couple weeks. It also helped having a 350-pound dude on staff who just wants to eat his breakfast while watching the front door when an ex-C level, that tried to be an Instagram bodybuilder, but has the genetics of a twig, attempts threatening to start something physical. Luckily, for the office front window, it didn't take more than a "do you really want to start something" look to get them to back off and leave. The video was priceless. Going back to the other employees. None of them showed up Tuesday. Or the day after that, or ever. Most didn't even call in, 2 did because they wanted stuff they left behind, but that ended up being a trick to get into the building. It's not like they didn't know the phone numbers, those were all the same. We tried to contact them, but they would not answer or talk. I know what some of you are thinking, and yes, nepotism. Since they didn't show up, call in, or quit, it was all classed as no-shows. Which ended up being hilarious when like a month later a bunch of them tried to file for unemployment saying they got laid off. EDD denied all of the claims. We almost didn't decline filing perjury charges against them. So we had to restaff the entire company, which was easy. Got some really good people, somehow, way better than that company deserved. Meanwhile, I'm spending the next several weeks taking control over every account and system as we find them, and generally reverse engineering the entire business, so we can run it. Gaps, aka G Suite, took a couple days to regain access over. The dumbass were locked out of it after I broken it intentionally. Turns out Google views the owner of the domain name as the owner of Gaps. This made that a lot easier. I get normal email back online and make accounts for the new staff. One of the things I missed during the initial recon mission was a bunch of PayPal accounts used the company's domains and were not on the books. Since I controlled everything else at this point, it was trivial to gain access to those long enough to pull transaction histories, including all the transfers out to personal bank accounts. We did eventually get that money back. I also missed an external service dumbass B and C setup, which had full API access to many mission-critical systems. I was unable to tell if B or C had used this to cause sabotage after being fired, or if it was just their incompetence when they set it up. The company that ran that service did not keep access logs for logins or changes. It kept interfering on the front end and caused numerous violations with some vendors, which we did not know was a thing. It took less than an hour to properly configure the service's limits to not violate the terms with various vendors. Of course, it took us a month to find all the policies with the vendors since A and B did not keep that info anywhere, and had been intentionally violating these themselves to make money and used shell companies to hide this activity from the vendors and Bossman. Fun times. Figuring out how the company ran was a massive pain. It did not help that everything was either very poorly done, just highly inefficient, or outright bad wrong. There were notes on random walls about how to do certain procedures, but all were long outdated. There were multiple apps and paid services that all did similar things, but none seemed to be fully set up to a functional level. Ultimately, I went by access dates on shortcuts, email logs, and a list of recent bills to figure out what they were last using, like who the current shipping company was and what service was being used to process orders. There was a lot of Googling of random company names from bills just to figure out what they were and if they were still being used, and to what extent. They had 3 to 5 different shipping services installed on every workstation in the orders department, but all were set up different on each workstation and none appeared fully functional except one on a single PC. Turned out they only had shipping working on one computer, and the entire department was sharing that one workstation for printing labels. There didn't even need to be a department for doing this in the first place. They were even bad in doing something poorly. Eventually I figured out almost everything and saw just what a massive mess it was. It became more obvious as to why they had so many employees, other than the nepotism. I had literally never worked with anything remotely like that sector before this, but reconfiguring just a few of the services that were already being paid for got the company running with just 5 people, and 2 of those were part-time. For example, what previously took a department of 6 full-time employees to process orders was now a one-person task of pressing a button twice a day, and that button was already there and would do this if it had been set up competently. I effectively became the COO/CIO/IT department for about half a year to get it running smoothly-ish with new management and staff. The IT needs were so basic that an MSP would be overkill, let alone the 5 figures monthly payment that A and B were funneling to C's personal company for consulting services. The new manager of the company didn't know that they were doing, despite what they would claim. But it was such a basic business that have any level of part-time management not trying to steal money and actively burn it down was enough for it to run fine with a couple competent staff actually running day-to-day operations. I ended up walking out after about 6 months. Could not get along with the new manager at all. I had enough of their shit one day, flipped them off over speakerphone as I walked out in an unending stream of profanity, all of which they completely missed. The staff found it funny/cathartic at least. Walked to a local burger joint, got an ice cream shake and some onion rings. The company did not need full-time IT anyway. I was still the IT manager for Bossman's real business, so I just went back to my normal job instead. I continued to get paid by that company for years. Bossman still owned it, so that was his decision, till it was restructured and sold. I think Bossman finally realized it was just a hobby to him, and that he stopped caring about it back in the first year. Sad part is, I wish that was all it was going during that period, and where it ended when I walked out. I quite seriously spent at least 2 years doing e-discovery for all the lawsuits and counter-lawsuits that followed our takeover. The emails alone were hundreds of gigs across dozens of accounts just for A and B. The story gets really off track from IT after this point, and would start needing more details than I wish to share. Suffice to say, it was an even bigger mess, but eventually all got settled several years later. Charges were filed but not pursued. While there was enough evidence of embezzlement, the amounts were too little for the DA to want to go after, i.e. not in the multi-millions. I do not know the actual terms of the settlement, though I am pretty sure it was something like "fuck off, never want to see you again." These companies themselves were not doing anything unique, and there was a glut of them back then, all doing the same thing. All ended up burning out within a few years as it was something an algorithm could do and worked better at much larger scales than any of these startups were doing. It was a crazy few years. I totally did not get paid enough for what I had to do or deal with in those first 6 months, and almost paid enough for the 2 years of dealing with discovery BS, but the next several years of being paid what was effectively a 15 to 20% raise for being on call almost made up for it. October 10th would not do again. I have spent all evening writing this, and that is enough. Apologies for any bad grammar I may have still missed on the nth revision. I don't store or process information or events linearly, so storytelling is not a career I would ever be suited for. Laughing face.